to another episode. I am coming to you live from my Reiki bed. I'm so excited you're here today, where we are talking about one of the most influential books on my entire life. It is the Conversation with God series. We're only going to talk about the first one today, but there's actually 4 books in this series and then a couple other books that Neale Donald Walsch has also written. I have loved everything that I've read by him, and I find this to be one of the most insightful spiritual texts that I've ever read. And some of the things that I really liked about this book is the beginning of the book is actually written from a standpoint where Neale is very angry at God. He has a lot of misconceptions about God. He doesn't really understand how God works, and he just wants some answers, wants some clarity, and needs to have this spiritual connection side of him just really met and fulfilled. So what happens is he normally would sit down and write letters to people when he was angry with them. So he sat down to write a letter to God to tell God how angry he was with him. And basically they entered into this automatic writing dialogue. If you've never heard of automatic writing, it is basically the concept that you can get into a channeled state and be able to receive messages, receive downloads, and you essentially act as that channel, kind of journaling out all of those downloads that are coming through from your higher power, from source, whatever you identify with. So that is what this man finds himself in this situation. He basically sits down, writes this angry letter to God. Plot twist, God starts writing back through automatic writing. And I thought this was incredible. It's also something I'm going to try. So stay tuned. I'm going to do, I think, a blog on my website, and it's going to be conversations with my guides or conversations with my angels. And it's just going to be me trying to connect with different angels or different guides that I have on my spirit team, and have a similar dialogue with some questions that I have about some different universal truths, things like that. So stay tuned. But the reason we're talking about this book today is, one, because I think you should read it if you are maybe on the cusp of a spiritual awakening, or if you have some anger towards God, if you're just unsure about spirituality. It's a great time to read it for that, but I'm also starting a book club. So March the 2nd at 6 p.m. at my location, Holistic Awakening. I will have it linked in the notes, but you can join us for a free book club. You don't even have to read the whole book. You can read the first chapter, come, discuss, and it's going to be a really fun time of spiritual gathering and community. So let's get into it. I started rereading this book, and I have a section where I have basically gone through and highlighted some pieces that I thought were incredibly insightful to give you guys an idea of what the book's about, so you can have a little bit more understanding of kind of the depth of the dialogue that they're having here. So this dialogue, it's basically written where the guy is talking, who's the author, and then God's talking. And so it's kind of this step back and forth between author, God. So God says, I talk to everyone all the time. The question is not whom do I talk, but who listens. The man says, intrigued. I asked God to expand on this subject. Here's what God said. First, let's change the word talk with the word communicate. It's a much better word, much fuller, more accurate one. When we try to speak to each other, me to you, you to me, we are immediately constricted by the unbelievable limitation of words. For this reason, I do not communicate by words alone. In fact, rarely do I do so. My most common form of communication is through feeling. Feeling is the language of the soul. If you want to know what's true for you about something, look to how you feel about it. Feelings are sometimes difficult to discover, and often even more difficult to acknowledge. Yet hidden in your deepest feelings is your highest truth. The trick is to get to those feelings, and I will show you how, again, if you wish. What? So God's literally saying, whenever you get those feelings, a lot of times that's him. Everybody refers to it as your gut feeling. It's truly one of the clear senses. The clear senses, if you've never heard of them, are basically the concept that we all have 5 different clear senses. Some people say 8. You have a lot of extrasensory abilities where maybe you hear things other people don't hear, you see things other people don't see, you smell things other people don't smell, feel things other people don't feel. All of those are signs of you having clear gifts and clear abilities. And so God is saying, I'm literally communicating with you through these clear abilities. So it goes on to say, I told God that I did wish, but that right now I wished even more for a complete and full answer to my first question. Here's what God said. I also communicate with thought. Thought and feeling are not the same, although they can occur at the same time. In communicating with thought, I often use images and pictures. For this reason, thoughts are more effective than mere words for tools of communication. In addition to feelings and thoughts, I also use the vehicle of experience as a grand communicator. And finally, when feelings and thoughts and experiences fail, I use words. Words are the least effective communicator. They are most open to misinterpretation and most often misunderstood. So I thought that was really cool because so often I felt like I was getting like thought downloads or images or pictures or whatever that I felt like was a conversation or a dialogue I was having with God, and I always doubted that. And then I read this and I was like, oh wait, God, I knew that was you this whole time. How cool. And so for me, it was a big piece of validation that I was looking for. Okay, so the next thing that they talk about, this is something that I personally wanted some answers on because I used to be somebody who really turned away from God. My perception of God was, if there is one, I don't want anything to do with him because he hasn't helped me out. I've prayed for lots of things and I haven't gotten, the answer I wanted. So like, no thanks. And a big part of that happened whenever my dad died. And I went through this period of kind of like reconnecting with God and like praying so much for like the month my dad was in the hospital before he died. And I really thought that my faith would save him. And it didn't. And so I went into this time of just hating God, blaming God, being like, if you were real, you would have saved him, all the things. So I really did not understand how prayer worked. And I very much thought that if I prayed for something and that thing didn't happen, that God was rejecting me. I took it personally. So let's talk about that because that's the next really key thing they talk about. So they're talking about faith. And the author, he says, yet so many people say that their prayers have gone unanswered. God says no prayer, and a prayer is nothing more than a fervent statement of what is, goes unanswered. Every prayer, every thought, every statement, every feeling is creative. To the degree that it is fervently held as truth, to the degree it will it be made manifest in your experience. When it says that a prayer has not been answered, what has actually happened is that the most fervently held thought, word, or feeling has become operative. Yet what you must know, and here's the secret, is that it is always the thought behind the thought, which must be called the sponsoring thought, that is controlling the thought. That's a lot. I'm gonna stop there. Basically, I interpret it as this. I am praying, God, please save my dad. God, please heal my dad. But deep down, I kind of know that it's the end, and I kind of know that, at that point, my dad had had cancer several times. He actually ended up getting COVID while he had cancer. He had been like sedated on a ventilator for like a month, and so like there very much came a time where I realized that what I was praying for wasn't in his best interest, and so it's like no matter how much I wanted him to heal, I also, at that point we had been told by the doctors like, hey, if he does come out of this, he's essentially going to be living as a vegetable is not the right way to say it, but that's kind of what they said. Like he would not probably be able to like he would have so much brain damage from how long he was sedated on a ventilator that like he would have no quality of life. And so it's like, even though I wanted him to be saved, I knew that that wasn't the best thing for his soul. And so it's almost like that's the thought behind the thought. So my thought is, God, please save my dad. My thought behind that is, if it's his time, please give him that peace to be able to pass. Even though I don't want that scenario to happen, that's deep down, what I want for his highest good. So that's how I interpreted all of that. A lot of big words, sponsoring thought. It was a whole new concept to me, but when I really sat down and unpacked it, that's the answer that I kind of came to. So they go on, and the author says, when you say that prayer is a statement of what is so, are you saying that God does nothing? That everything which happens after a prayer is the result of the prayer's action? God says, if you believe that God is some omnipotent being who hears all prayers, says yes to some, no to others, and maybe but not now to the rest, you are mistaken. By what rule of thumb would God decide? This had me, that's exactly how I thought. I thought God heard our prayers, said, you're not worth helping, on to the next person, and that was how I interpreted my prayers going unanswered. So this was like newsflash to me. He goes on to say, if you believe that God is the creator and decider of all things in life, you are mistaken. God is the observer, not the creator, and God stands ready to assist you in living life, but not in the way you might expect. It is not God's function to create or uncreate the circumstances or conditions of your life. God created you in the image and likeness of God. You have created the rest through the power God has given you. God created the process of life and life itself as you know it, yet God gave you free choice to do with life as you will. In this sense, your will for you is God's will for you. You are living your life the way you are living your life, and I have no preference in the matter. I'm sorry, what? I was always taught, I grew up Southern Baptist, so I was always taught God has a lot of opinions on your life. There's a lot of rules, and if you want to have a relationship with God, you better follow all of them or he's going to reject you and send you to the pits of hell. So this was like, this understanding logically in my mind makes more sense, but getting out of that perception of God being kind of the decider, and like part of, I feel like being raised Southern Baptist was there was very much like a whether or not God answered your prayers was almost tied to whether or not he thought you were a good enough Christian, was kind of the underlying concept. And that I really struggled with as well, because every time I didn't get a prayer answered, I was like, oh, it's because God hates me and I'm not good enough, you know? And so being able to have a completely different perception of God was mind-blowing to me. So let's go on. This is the grand illusion in which you have engaged, that God cares one way or another what you do. I do not care what you do, and that's hard for you to hear. Yet I do care what your children do. Yet do you care what your children do when you send them out to play? Is it a matter of consequence whether they play tag, hide and seek, or pretend? No, it's not, because you know they're perfectly safe. You have placed them in an environment which you consider friendly and very okay. Of course, you will always hope that they do not hurt themselves, and if they do, you will be right there to help them, heal them, and allow them to feel safe again, to be happy again, and to go and play another day. But whether they choose hide and seek or pretend will not matter to you the next day either. That was a great analogy, I thought. Literally how our parents are like, I don't care, just go out and play. Like, that's how God is to us with this life. Like, I don't care, go out and build your dream life. He's not sitting here judging and condemning everything. One thing that I was also taught in Christianity is basically that like you have to like beg God to forgive you for all your sins every night before you go to bed, because if not, you might go to hell and be held accountable for all those sins. So again, I just had a lot of misconceptions around God, faith, all of it. And this book helped me to see that so much of those things were things that man had made up around religion, not things that were actually true of God. So that was really, really helpful for me. Okay, so next part. This, bear with me, I have like a whole page highlighted here that I thought was really insightful. So we are going to go through this. So they're talking about God in the context of religion right here. And so they're basically talking about how a lot of religion is God's way of trying to explain or define how God is and what he would want of us. So they get really deep about that here. God says, just as you have chosen to personify pure love as the character you call God, so have you chosen to personify abject fear as the character you call the devil. Some on earth have established rather elaborate mythologies around this event, complete with scenarios of battle and war, angelic soldiers and devilish warriors, the forces of good and evil, light and dark. This mythology has been mankind's early attempt to understand and tell others in a way they could understand, a cosmic occurrence of which is the human soul is deeply aware, but which the mind can barely conceive. In rendering the universe as a divided version of itself, God produced from pure energy all that now exists, both seen and unseen. In other words, not only was the physical universe created, but the metaphysical universe as well. The part of God which forms the second half of the am, not am equation also exploded into an infinite number of units smaller than the whole. These energy units you would call spirits. In some of your religious mythologies, it states that God the Father had many spirit children. This parallel to the human experience of life multiplying itself seems to be the only way the masses could be made to hold in reality the idea of the sudden appearance, the sudden existence of countless spirits in the kingdom of heaven. In this instant, your mythical tales and stories are not so far from ultimate reality, for the endless spirits comprising the totality of me are, in a cosmic sense, my offspring. My divine purpose in dividing me was to create sufficient parts of me so that I could know myself experientially. This is one way for the creator to know itself experientially as the creator, and that is to create. So I gave to each of the countless parts of me, to all of my spirit children, the same power to create which I have as the whole. That was a lot. So basically, God's saying, I was there, I was God, and what I decided is I wanted to create, I wanted to experience. So I made all of these little spirits that are all little pieces of me, which is all of us. We're all spirits that are in a human body or a human form, because spirits can take on lots of forms. And so basically he's saying, hey, I split up my essence to become all of you guys so we could feel and experience, because if you're existing in polarity where there's nothing, it's boring. So it's like the concept of wanting to create, wanting to do, feel, experience all the things that we do now as humans. So this is interesting. So they're talking about I like to refer to it as this kind of period, lives between lives. So there's a concept that, the soul is eternal, and after you pass, you have this time period of lives between lives, where you're kind of looking back at your life, reviewing it. You're also deciding what you want to do, in the future or for your next life. And in this time, it's like, all the universal truths, all the universal laws, everything makes sense, everything's been revealed, you understand cosmic destiny, all the things. So that's what they're talking about where we pick up here. Of course, this is God. Of course, there is no way for you to not be who and what you are. You simply are that pure creative spirit, always have been, always will be. So you did the next best thing. You caused yourself to forget who you really are. Upon entering the physical universe, you relinquished your remembrance of yourself. This allows you to choose to be who you are rather than simply waking up in the castle, so to speak. It is in the act of choosing to be, rather than simply being told that you are, a part of God that you experience yourself as being at total choice, which is what, by definition, God is. Yet, how can you have a choice about something over which there is no choice? You cannot not be my offspring no matter how hard you try, but you can forget. You are, have been, and will always be a divine part of the divine whole, a member of the body. This is why the act of rejoining the whole, of returning to God, is called remembrance. You actually choose to remember who you are, or to join together with the various parts of you to experience the all of you, which is to say, the all of me. So that's why the concept of us returning to God, it's literally like us coming back to this concept of oneness, that we're all little pieces of God, and we can all reunite in this spirit of oneness. So I thought that was really interesting. It goes on to say, your job on earth, therefore, is not to learn because you already know, but to remember who you are and to remember who everyone else is. That is why a big part of your job is to remind others. That is to remind them so they can remember also. All of the wonderful spiritual teachers have been doing just that. It is your sole purpose. That is to say, your sole purpose. So that I thought was really interesting. So basically it's like once you're awake, your purpose is to help awaken others and help others to remember who they are, which is divine beings, spirits, living a human experience. So here they're talking about judgment. And so basically they're, kind of going back and forth about right and wrong. And he's like, I was told that you, being God, gave us, like, here's right, here's wrong, do this or you go to hell. And God's like, no. What I want is for you to decide what you think about something, and then if you don't like it, what are you going to do to change it? So that's kind of the verbiage that they're having here. He says, do not condemn, therefore, all that you would call bad in this world. Rather ask yourself, what about this have you judged bad? And what, if anything, do you wish to do to change it? This is a big thing. So if you're going to reject something, what part of that are you rejecting and what are you willing to do to change it? He's basically saying judgment could be used for a purpose, not for pain, if that makes sense. So I'm going to read one more piece to you guys before I wrap this up. But this is really important because this is talking about like the shoulds and the should nots, and our perception that God basically has a list of rules that we have to follow, and if not, we are not good people. So here's how they pick up. The author says, "Are you saying that I shouldn't feel bad about the starving children in Africa, the violence and injustice in America, the earthquake that kills hundreds in Brazil?" God says, "There are no shoulds or shouldn't in God's world. Do what you want to do. Do what reflects, what represents you as a grander version of yourself. If you want to feel bad, but judge not, and neither condemn, for you know not why a thing occurs, nor to what end. And remember you this, that to which you condemn will condemn you, and that which you judge you will one day become. Rather, seek to change those things or support others who are changing those things which no longer reflects your highest sense of who you are. Yet bless all, for all is the creation of God through life living, and that is the highest creation." This was really validating for me. One thing that I used to really struggle with is I used to be so judgmental, which is so funny because I'm a recovering alcoholic. I struggled with mental health. I was in the broom closet for many years with my spiritual gifts. So I am not the person who ever should have judged anybody because I've made every mistake there is. I've gone down every wrong path you can go down. I have rejected God. I've treated people badly. I've done all the things. And when I was in that place of being that person, I was so judgmental towards others, which is so funny because it's always, I very much like looking back, I'm like, who the heck were you to judge, you know? But everything that I judged other people for, later I ended up in that situation. So let's say I judged somebody for having to steal bread to feed their family. Later, I ended up in that situation. That's not an exact example, but like basically all the things that I judged people for. And it's funny because a lot of times we judge people for their decisions, not knowing what options they had to choose from. And I very much did that. And then when I ended up in situations that I judged people for being in, I was like, oh no, but you don't get it. My hand was different. My situation was harder. I'm justified for being here. And that was a lesson I had to learn the hard way. And it very much validates that here. Like, you can judge people, but you're going to end up being in that same position where you're going to be getting judged for the thing you judged them for. So just skip that and love instead. I thought that was really cool. And so they go on just to talk about shoulds and should nots. And I'm just going to read one more piece and then we'll wrap up. Could we just stop here for a moment and let me catch my breath? Did I just hear you say there are no shoulds or should nots in God's world? God, that is correct. Author, how can that be? If there are none in your world, where could they be? God, indeed, where? I repeat the question. Where else would shoulds and should nots appear if not in your world? God, in your imagination. The author, but those who have taught me all about the rights and the wrongs, the do's and the don'ts, the shoulds and the shouldn'ts, told me all those rules were laid down by you, by God. God says, then those who taught you were wrong. I have never set down a right or a wrong or a do or a don't. To do so would be to strip you completely of your greatest gift, the opportunity to do as you please, and the experience that results in that, the chance to create yourself anew in the image and likeness of who you really are, the space to produce a reality of a higher and higher you based on your grandest idea of what it is of which you are capable. To say that something, a thought, a word, an action is wrong would be as much to tell you not to do it. To tell you not to do it would be to prohibit you. To prohibit you would be to restrict you. To restrict you would be to deny the reality of who you really are, as well as the opportunity for you to create and experience the truth. There are those who say I've given you free will, yet these same people claim that if you do not obey me, I will send you to hell. What kind of free will is that? Does this not make a mockery of God, to say nothing of any sort of true relationship between us? I'm going to pause there, because if that isn't what you want to learn more about, like, ooh, because they're talking about so many things. Like, if you grew up in a household that was religious rather than spiritual, like, there are so many societal constructs that are based on being built in religion that are explained in a very different way in this book. And that was so insightful for me, because I always struggled to align completely with any one religion. I always very much felt like I kind of wanted to take the pieces that resonated with me and leave the rest. And that didn't really seem like an option until I entered into the realm of spirituality, where I was like, oh wait, I can believe in God and have a connection with God and have a relationship with God, but also tap into my medium abilities and, connect with people who have passed and read Akashic records and do all of these things. They can all coexist. And so it was so cool for me to realize that. So if this book is interesting, I will link it below. You can get it off Amazon. You can get the whole series if you're interested. If you're not sure, just buy the first one. And if you want to join the book club, feel free to come out and join us on March the 2nd at 6 p.m. I hope to see you there. And as always,